Hey, I'm Hendao, and this is how I made my Tannis cosplay so that I could go to the Borderlands movie premiere and meet Tannis while wearing Tannis. I did the Borderlands 3 version of her and not her movie look, though I did pay homage to that too. I also actually got to be an extra in the movie, but that's another story, and it was really cool and really fun. As for the actual movie, don't get me started. Actually, just watch K6's review of it. I'll get to it eventually. For now, let's just focus on writing a love letter to one of the best game franchises out there. For those who don't know, this is Tannis. She's a recurring character in the Borderlands games, and the TLDR for her is that she worked for a company called Doll that basically stranded her on a planet for the equivalent of 7 Earth years, which made her a little kooky. Her quests have some of the best humor and random lines.
This lab smells of bacon. Bacon is for sycophants and products of incest.
And she's definitely a fan favorite. I think that she doesn't get cosplayed as often just because look how much she's wearing. That's not only a ton of stuff to make, it's also going to be hot as balls. So let's make it. There's 6 major things for me to consider about making this. First, I want to consolidate as many parts of this as possible. It's a lot of stuff and I'm going to travel with it, so I want to reduce as much of the suit-up time and the chance of forgetting stuff as possible. 2, there's a lot of painting, and so I'm going to need some non-stretch fabrics as much as possible. It's just way easier to paint non-stretch fabrics as opposed to stretchy fabric. 3, the shape and texture are a lot more important than the colors since everything's getting painted anyway. 4, I need a pocket for all of my stuff. I can't really do it in the coat because the coat is open, so you'd probably see those pockets. Instead, I'm going to turn the echo recorder into a purse thing. 5, the placement of most things revolves around the coat, so I'm gonna start with that. And finally, number 6, I super need to remember to save all of my patterns because I'm going to offer them on my Patreon and in my web store with when I finally get that up and running. Okay, less yapping, more crafting. In this part, I'm gonna focus on just the soft parts of the cosplay, so basically all of the sewing. I'm gonna make this coat in red microsuede, line the top half with a slippery black fabric so that it's easy to slide on, and sew on Velcro so that it's easy to attach the harnessing and armor later. There's also all these little armored pieces, and I'm going to do most of them out of a faux leather fabric that I can sew to the actual coat. So during the mock-up phase, I'm mapping out where these armor bits go, along with where I need to have Velcro for later attachment. I've mapped out a pattern for each of these armor pieces, and I'm marking where they're going to go on the coat. It's obviously super hard to sew these things to the coat after assembly, so I need to mark where it's going to go so I can sew it to the fabric first before actually assembling the coat with the real fabric. I do want these armor pieces to have a little bit of dimension, so as opposed to just sewing the fabric down, which will look kind of flat, I'm actually going to thicken them out with a little layer of craft foam. So I'm leaving enough room around the edges so that I can add foam and fold the fabric under, just to give it a cleaner and puffier edge. Some of these armor pieces also have these striped segments, and I'm going to sew those in rather than just paint them on. I love painting, but from experience with 3 other Borderlands cosplays, I know that I hit this insane point where I've been painting for 4 straight days and I'm just seeing lines in my sleep and I've lost the capacity to think. So I'm going to preemptively help that by sewing in the lines and shapes now so that I can just sort of mindlessly paint over them later when I give everything a black outline. So I'm doing all these pieces by just gluing foam in with barge, folding it over, gluing down the edges, and then sewing that fold over down. Here are all the sewn black armor pieces. You can see that a few of them have soft Velcro sewn on as well, and that's in all of the spots I assume I'm going to attach armor later. Now I can sew these pieces to the coat itself. My sewing machine is mechanical, and this will sew through anything as long as I can get all of the layers in there. We don't have to sew down the entire perimeter of each of these pieces, just do it in enough spots to hold it in place. A major tip for making cosplay is to test fit as much as possible. It's so important in making sure that you don't waste your time by catching mistake too late. This is so prevalent that at most crafting parties, one or all of us end up just crafting our underwear because it's super annoying to take your clothes on and off. That sounds sexier than it is. Crafting in undies is a lot less like this and a lot more like this. Anyway, with all that finally done, which took me about 2 days, I can make the lining. You don't need to add lining, but making one out of a slippery fabric can make it so much easier to slide on, especially if you're sweaty, which I'm absolutely going to be in this costume. The bottom of the coat is visible, so that part is just going to be the same red suede fabric. and from the waist up, it'll be this black lining. Finally, I'm adding black bias tape as a trim around the edge of the coat. This saves me the trouble of having to paint a black outline on all the edges of this thing later. I think it saves a lot of time in the long run. Woo! Coat is done, so now I can move on to patterning out the armor and harnessing, but like I said, I'm going to do that in part 2 because it's just easier to lump all of the foam crafting stuff together. This video would be really chaotic and hard to follow if I did all of it in like chronological order, so I'm going to jump around. So fast forward to when I finish the chest plate and the shirt so that I can map out where to make the strap that's going to hold the coat on. The chest plate is going to affect the fit, especially around the boobie area because it's bigger than what I've actually got going on here. I use duct tape to mark where the coat edges are and where to add the snaps. I made the strap out of leather, and I'm using snaps so that I could detach the coat because she actually does wear this brown strap when the coat is off, and I don't want to make it twice. I'm painting this with watered down acrylic paint using a big brush to stipple on the color. I use acrylic because it's really easy to speed up the dry time with a little bit of heat gun love. The Borderlands art style has this splotchy stippled look to it as opposed to like a really smooth blend, so I think this means that you can be a little bit messier with it, so it's pretty beginner friendly. I think the Borderlands art style looks a lot more impressive than the effort it takes. The cartoony effect just really reads well on camera, and in my opinion, it's not that tricky to achieve. Like, it does take a lot of time, but not a ton of precise skill, especially if you get these paint pens, which make it so much easier to do all of that black line work. I did this whole project with just 3 black paint pens, but that's kind of going to depend on the absorbency of your fabrics. The black line work is what really makes the Borderlands art style what it is. Basically, everything gets a black outline on the edges, and creases of fabric also have a bit of an outline. It's not technically cell shading, but it does look the same, so you can Google that if you want a visual reference on where to put those black lines. You can look up Genoza costuming, or Genoza costuming, sorry, I don't know how to say it, and Jessalyn Cupcake, 2 really well-known cosplayers that have done close-ups of their work, so you can reference them. The Borderlands community is really sweet and wholesome, and a lot of us have a very methodical way of doing this stuff, so reach out for tips and tricks. I think that most people in the community would be happy to help. The last step is to add highlights, which really adds to that cartoony effect. I tend to be sparing with the highlights because the game art doesn't actually have that many of them, and I'm afraid of gaming nerds being like, that's not accurate. But like, if you look at Genoza and Jessalyn's work, they exaggerate the highlights and it looks f***ing sick. So do what works for you. Okay, coat's done. Here's how it looks all finished and dry and crispy. I'm going to use a lot of the same techniques for the pants, which are this dark brown pair of microsuede leggings. That's just what I had. Since they're stretchy, I'm patterning where the armor bits go while actually wearing the pants. I got so lucky and found this huge sheet of leather at the thrift store for like 200 kroners, which is like 20 bucks. So I'm going to make the armor pieces out of this. It's the same process, it just won't need a layer of craft foam sandwiched in there. Folded leather has enough dimension on its own. I don't normally work with leather, but I make an exception for when it's thrifted because I think recycling and waste reduction is really important. I'm non-vegan or vegetarian, though ethically I kind of think that I should be, but anyway, I don't currently mind animal consumption if the animals are raised humanely and the whole animal is used. But that's not how the world works, and if I don't use this, I'd probably just use more of that plasticky PVC stuff that's also pretty bad for the environment, so it's like no matter what, I'm going to be in the bad place. I decided to use it this time, so just letting you know that it kind of keeps me up at night still. But anyway, I pinned the leather pieces to the pants while wearing them, seam ripped the pants open, sewed the pieces down, added the gray portion, and then stitched the pants back together. Also, the bottom half is gray, and if I try to paint them gray, it'll just end up super stiff, so instead I marked where to replace the bottom half with gray stretch fabric. Even though it's mostly covered by the boots and the coat, and nobody's really going to notice this tiny section of the pants, but attention to detail is what makes the brain go. And they're looking pretty good. Once again, I'm using acrylic paint because it's easy to work with, bonds well to leather, and can be dried quicker via heat gun. I had to paint all these red leather pieces gray and add black shading. For the black lines on the fabric part of the pants, I actually put the pants on and just marked some of the places that the pants crease naturally. Then I took them off, and I'm refining those lines and adding a bit of a highlight. The pants are pretty dark, so I'm not spending a ton of time on this since I don't think it's going to show up that prominently anyway. But it's still there. Then I can go back and add shading to the gray pieces, and of course, add that black line work. Pants are good to go. They're stretchy and comfy, and I don't have to worry about these pieces falling off because they're sewn on. And I think the armor placement is quite flattering to the booty. Too bad it's covered by the coat, but at least I'll know that my butt looks good. I could not for the life of me thrift or find a button-up shirt that would work for this cosplay, or even just a long-sleeve shirt that was that correct off-white color. I normally order that kind of thing on Amazon, but Amazon isn't really a thing in Norway, and I thought I'd miss Amazon Prime a lot more than I do. It's actually not that hard to live without, and I like Norway's choices on labor and all that stuff, so it's working out okay so far. But all that to say that I am stuck with this long sleeve stretch white shirt that I'm gonna make it work. The buttons don't have to be functional, so I can just sew those on there and have this fake closure at the front. These arm straps are just wide brown elastic because they will stay up better if they're stretchy. I have to make the acrylic paint pretty watery to get it to saturate stretched fabric, but it is working. I'm adding gray, but also bits of brown and yellow to add to the dirty weathered effect. The line work is also made difficult by the fabric being really stretchy, but as long as we go over the lines like 3 times, it works. Overall, it turned out pretty good. At some point, I will shoot this BL3 version of Tannis, but I kind of didn't know how to handle it right now because it's sort of a spoiler for like movie audiences, even though Borderlands 3's been out for a long time. And then the movie ended up not being super good, so we're probably not going to get a sequel, so I guess it didn't matter in the end. I just overthink stuff sometimes, but I will shoot this at some point, especially now that Borderlands 4 has been announced. Okay, so for the gloves, I actually already had these fingerless gloves that pretty much perfectly match Tannis's. Obviously, since they're black, the black line work won't really show up, so instead I'm focusing on adding highlights to achieve that same cartoony effect. Once again, the thrift store has come through for me, this time for the boots. They have a heel which isn't accurate but will make me a little bit taller, so I'll take it. The painting effect will also help me hide the fact that I'm not gonna make the shapes super accurately. Like they aren't actually gonna wrap around and strap down here, we're just gonna make it look like they do. Again, I also know that my shoes aren't gonna show in like 80% of cosplay photos, so I'm not keen on spending a ton of time making it super accurate when I don't think it's gonna make that big of a difference visually. All these little armor bits are that same thrifted leather. I was able to sew the top 2 to the actual boots, and the bottom piece is being held on with barge cement and super glue. I started the painting process with making the brown part of the boots nice and dimensional with shading and dirt effects. Then painted the armor pieces gray, taping off the boots so I don't get gray on them. And I try to reuse the tape as much as possible because the environment. Not that individual choices make that much of a difference, but it kind of helps with like your overall mindset. The real culprit is obviously corporations, so may capitalism perish one day. Then I did this black shading around the armor pieces. And with some black line work everywhere and some wee highlights, the boots are done. If I was smart, I would have put in squishy insoles, but I forgot to do that day. But it still looks neat. So now what's left is the chest plate, shoulder armor, goggles, and echo recorder, and the wig and makeup. But all of that's going to be in other videos, so for now, this is what we have so far. I'll also have something eventually about my experience getting to be a special extra in the movie, but I'll probably wait until it comes out on streaming services or DVD if that's still a thing, so that I can get some proper screen grabs. Thanks so much for watching. If you have a couple of bucks to spare, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really helps me a ton. I offer patterns and photo sets and a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and I'm giving myself 1 year to break even on the cost of cosplaying over here in Europe, so I super appreciate any and all help if you want to keep seeing content from me. So yeah, see you next time for all of the fun parts of the Tannis cosplay, and until then, stay crafty! Thanks to all of my patrons, especially my top tier patrons, Mike D, Robert Reyes, Ricky Rod 33, Mikkel, Turner, Andrew Leo, Grant Valentine, Nips 86, Josh M, Technoman, and Shattenwolf. Love y'all, thank you so much!